So what stands out the most, I think, for me is your journalistic experience and the way in which you explore, as you travel across the country, all of these different stories. And I, like probably other readers, expected a memoir, even though you say that it's not going to be exactly like that, and still I think we expected, probably because of your own sort of self-identification with the issue. How were you able to really listen carefully to these things in such a non-judgmental way? Because you tell these stories of adversaries, really, with such grace. Where do you find that grace?
I think part of it's the editing. Just because I am not judging in the writing doesn't mean that I didn't have flash judgments during the process. But one of the nice things about the book reporting process is that it takes so long that you have time to come to a better place of grace. I don't think some of my more uncharitable instant reactions would be constructive in the conversation. And I think there's a bigger lesson there. We all should stop and talk a little more slowly than we tend to. And that's one of the most troubling things, I think, about the way the church is having much of the discourse. Not just on issues of sexuality, but so many other things. We're so quick to jump in and judge and issue these pronouncements about how things should be. And we're so quick to claim to know the mind of God on everything.
One thing that strikes me is how open people are with you, especially, the Phelps family and the Westboro Baptist folks and David Shelley, who you speak to at one point. And it makes me wonder, and you refer to this a few times in the book, whether they know about your sexual orientation, whether they ask about those things, or how it is that, is it just their confidence that they're right, that they feel very open about saying exactly what they think? You must have felt at some point in some of these interviews like, wow, this is gold. I mean, they're just telling me everything.
Yeah, there are great quotes. I think part of it is that Americans really like to talk about themselves. So you give people an opening. Let's say you're sitting next to someone on an airplane, and they will run with it. They will run right through that opening and keep running and keep running.
You just keep writing.
You stop. And as a journalist, that's amazing. I like when people don't need me to ask a lot of questions, because sometimes it tends to show me where their hearts are, what they really care about. When they're waiting for the questions and it becomes more of a Q&A format as opposed to a conversation, I'm the one who's in charge of that. And sometimes that doesn't produce something that's as honest and candid.
Right. You, because this is combination memoir and journalism, you tip your hand up in a few places, like how you feel about things. But at the end of this journey, the book's out now. You're doing a lot of the tour about it and all of that. How do you feel about the state of God in America? Not just on this topic of the church's relationship with its LGBTQ members, but just in general. Like, are you discouraged, encouraged?
I'm discouraged by how easily we reshape God rather than trying to figure out what God is supposed to look like. It also strikes me that the God that many people in America worship seems so easy to understand. And what I mean by that is, well, we're constantly saying God says this, and God says that, and God believes this, and God believes that. And I said something in an interview not too long ago that I'll repeat here, even though I think it's actually really easy to misunderstand. I don't think I want to believe in such an easy to understand God. If everyone in this world can so quickly identify his positions on every single issue, where's the mystery? Where is the majesty in that? It's just basically a carbon copy of our own brains. That's what God is for a lot of people.
What is it Anne Lamott says, that you've got God wrong when he hates all the same people that you hate? Like, it's, that's like where you've made God in your image, right? This is idolatry.
Right. That's what we do. We make God in our image. I think that's a good way of putting it.
So do you think, has it ever occurred to you, or you're tempted to think as you go through this journey, that God really is a sociological construct, and that it's just something that people create to make themselves feel better about on either the very liberal or the very conservative side, how do you find God in the midst of all of this?
I doubt a lot, and my pastor has talked about doubt in some of his sermons over the last couple of weeks, and he gave a particularly good one in which he talked about the way Thomas is portrayed in a lot of our everyday dialogue, how doubting Thomas is always seen as a bad thing, right? That's kind of the conventional wisdom. But the way Jesus responded when Thomas was doubting was not to say, oh, Thomas, you shouldn't have asked those questions. He showed him his hands. He showed him the wounds. He gave him the evidence that he was looking for. And I think, that says something to me about the importance and the acceptance of doubt in the Christian framework. There is a term that the blogger Jason Boyette introduced to me that I really like, and I don't know where he got it from, but he calls himself a Christian agnostic. And there's a humility to that I really appreciate. And what he means by it is, there's an acknowledgement that we ultimately can't know 100% for certain on this earth whether God exists or not. But he chooses the way of Jesus. He chooses to express his life in what he sees as a Christian way. And there's something really appealing to me. So I think on my better days, I would call myself a Christian agnostic. And I don't think it's appropriate to use the words that I call myself on other days.
On the subject of the church and its relationship to LGBTQ members and those in the public that aren't part of the church, what do you hope for? Or if you were to give, and again, I know this is sort of outside of what you're probably comfortable with as a journalist, but what would you, if you were to give advice to the church, and with the little c, maybe the big C, the big church, what would be your advice from your experience listening to all these people about moving forward on this conversation? Especially for those churches that tend to be scared of it.
I think the most important thing for me right now, and the thing that's been on my mind, is how eager so many people are in congregations, in the pews, to talk about these things. So I think the first piece of advice would be for pastors, and I come down pretty hard on pastors in the book. Calling them sheep rather than shepherds is not something most of them will want to hear. But the fact is, they are not leading the conversation. And it's leaving the people in the pews to flail for themselves. And that's not right. Church should be the place where we can be vulnerable, and where we can deal with the issues that are bothering us, that are troubling our souls. And if church is not going to be that place, church is going to become irrelevant to people. So I think that's the first piece of advice I have. I guess the second is to be more gracious. I don't think we have to agree on everything to be one church. I don't think we have to come to the same conclusions on these issues. I don't think it's a deal breaker. I know other people think that it is a deal breaker, but I think if we listen more, humanize more, empathize more, it'll put us in a better place. I really have come to believe over the course of working on this book that we kind of have a national as well as a church-wide skill shortage in empathy. It's something that we don't do well. It's something that Jesus did incredibly well.
Wow. Thank you for taking this time to talk to me about your book, and I hope people will go out and buy it and use it even in congregational settings to help humanize, I think, the stories, because you are so gracious, and I know you've been criticized for being gracious to people who are, by many estimations, enemies of the gay and lesbian members of our community, and yet you give them a chance to speak, and I think it's also very Christ-like, to love your enemies, to turn the other cheek, to give them a chance to, if they wish, hang themselves by some of their comments, or to just honestly express themselves. And so I'm grateful, and I hope that your book will go a long ways to creating a more peaceful community in which people can have this conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.